episode of CaN Gallant IAS and News Analysis. So let us look into yesterday's and today's topic. So I have with me about 7 important topics from yesterday's newspaper and today's newspaper. The first we will be dealing about children, a key yet missed demographic in AI regulations. So we will be looking how this AI is affecting children and such. Then we have the findings of the parliamentary panel on the new education policy and what is the status of the higher education institutes and higher education in India. That is something that has been discovered by the Parliamentary Committee on Education. Then we have why the Northeast cannot be treated as a single homogeneous territory. So we had a previous year question based upon is Northeast a homogeneous territory or not. So on the basis of that, this particular discussion becomes very important. Then we have the term name called the urban shift, because this is a shift in urbanization patterns and how that is actually going to affect the globe itself. Then we have the Global Digital IDs report that has been actually given out by the Moody's credit rating. So we will be looking into that aspect with respect to the Aadhaar in India. Then we have Indians eat more salt, because in the recent times we have been talking about how there is actually globally high BP and how it is actually related to too much of salt intakes, especially in traditional diets in India. Then we have the balsams, which is actually the touch me not plant type, which is actually present in Munnar. So we will be discussing these 7 topics in detail today. The first thing is children, a key yet missed demographic in AI regulation. The first thing which we need to know is that the global summit on artificial intelligence is the first such event that is going to take place, and it will be hosted by India in the coming December. That is the first such global summit on artificial intelligence. This is the first ever summit and will be conducted by India in the coming year. So it is told that if India is actually going to boost our artificial intelligence, if there is a market of approx $500 billion. That is how much the implementation of artificial intelligence in India is worth. Now this can be achieved by about 2025. So that is one of the key findings that the article has mentioned. It is projected to add about $500 billion to the Indian's economy by 2025. This is close to approximately 10% of the country's target GDP. So that much how much growth we can actually ensure if we are actually culminating artificial intelligence into our system. Also, in the course of the artificial intelligence, our Prime Minister Narendra Modi has stated, and I think the global framework on the ethical expansion of artificial intelligence. Now we know ethics in artificial intelligence is one of the key topics or the key debate topics, why there is requirement of ethics or ethical concern in artificial intelligence as such. So the global framework on the ethical expansion of artificial intelligence also mentioned by our Prime Minister. The thing is that India has a lot of population who depends upon the data. So as a person or as the representative or the champion of the global south, the policies we make on artificial intelligence will be set as an example for the other members or other developing countries as such in the global south as well. But in all this artificial intelligence, the important thing which we need to address is that majority of this is not actually suitable for children or not developed for children as such. But the artificial intelligence, the gaming, the platform, the internet is mostly used by children, and we as adults depend upon the children to know more. So this is actually a reverse kind of what has happened with the technology here. The thing is that artificial intelligence technology was actually created for the adults, but the majority of usage is children. Even if we need to know how the GPay works, or how is this UPI going to work, or how is this how to create a FB or an Instagram account, our parents come and ask our present smaller generation here. But this was to happen in reverse case. So that is one of the major concerns that has been highlighted by the author. The artificial intelligence has actually created a lot of problems in the children, especially for a growing teenagers and such. The thing is that the first thing is there is lack of privacy, there is lack of transparency. It has actually created a lot of mental health problems. You can see in the past years there is an increased case of mental health issues, especially among children. There is problems about body shaming and such. Even in Instagram you might see how there is perfect body. They might be using filter or they might have done plastic surgery. But what we see is their perfect body, their perfect space and everything is perfect, and that creates certain kind of insecurity towards us. Now that has actually changed the mental health condition within children and teenagers as such. Then there is other problems of cyberbullying, cyber crimes. We can always see that how the money is actually taken away, or how a girl is actually bullied online. So that is some of the other problems that is actually related with. Another problem is addiction. Even as an adult or even as a young adults, even for the UPSC aspirants such as us, we spend a lot of time on phones. That is actually another problem. It causes a lot of addiction to phones, to internet, to artificial intelligence as such. Then there is misinformation, there is spread of fake news. You see then and then again there is a lot of fake news spread via mobiles, via WhatsApp, via the other messaging, signal and such apps through which a lot of fake information actually passes. Then there is cyberbullying, sexual grooming. So these some of the important takes place or the problem that actually happens in it. Or apart from this, there is something growing, enthusiastic sharens. The thing is that a lot of parents actually, like a lot of young couples actually decide to share their own lives in the social media. You can see a lot of families, the young couples who are starting their family as such, shows their babies or their children in this, expose the children's young infants to this platform as well. So that is actually going to affect the child mentally when she or he actually grows up. So that is one of the enthusiastic sharens where they actually share all their personal information, their home detail, their daily life routine about their child and everything in their social media platform so that they can get more views and earn more money. So that is what the enthusiastic sharens is about. Another thing is actually the deep fake capability. We know, like as an adult, you know deep fake should be used for this and that. It can be actually used for a negative purpose as well. But for children who actually indulges in deep fake capabilities or creating more photos and such, they don't know the ethical context of this. So these are some of the ways by which a child is actually affected by artificial intelligence. Another thing, an important thing which we need to know is that there is social inequalities and such that is actually prevented without artificial intelligence as such. But thing is that inculcation of artificial intelligence actually creates digital divide. It also exposes the real world biasness, the real world biases in this artificial intelligence world as well. So that is some of the important concerns that the author has actually mentioned from this article. In India, we know we have actually rolled out our new data protection laws and such. So in that law, one important aspect the author actually talks is that the law should be actually, there should be certain laws for the protection of children's in it as well. So that is one of the important suggestions the author actually means. We have the new data protection law in India, but the important thing is that how this law approached the children's in India. So that is one important key area which the government need to actually address. Now, then if you are looking at the international approach and guideline, there are certain things which you actually need to know. If you are looking, there is actually UNICEF's guideline for policy making on artificial intelligence and children. The UNICEF actually gives out about 9 such criteria through which we have to ensure that the children's and the artificial intelligence both are like, there are guidelines for the policy makers on how to actually make laws in the case of artificial intelligence and how it's going to affect the children or how the children should be protected as such. Now India, like it is based on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and India is actually a signatory to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Another important thing is California's Age Appropriate Design Code Act. Now this actually ensures much of transparency and it actually aims that the children are not actually exposed to such kind of threats or harms that is happening via the artificial intelligence. India could actually create similar laws. India's Age Appropriate Design Code Act could be actually created on baseline with this California's Age Appropriate Design Code Act. Another thing is Australia's Online Safety Youth Advisory Council. Now in this youth, like children or youth up from the age of 13-24 years of age are actually talked and they actually give out what they like in artificial intelligence, what are the threats they face in artificial intelligence, and with that certain laws can be actually made, like more child and young adult friend safely laws can be actually created so that they don't get exposed to the harm sides of artificial intelligence. So in India we need to create certain patterns regarding to this, and the international we have some guidelines that we can actually follow so that we can actually create much more friendly, children friendly laws regarding artificial intelligence as such. Now moving on to our next topic, we have the findings of the parliamentary panel on the new education policy. So recently a parliamentary committee on education headed by Vivek Thakur has been actually given out. So they actually talked about some implementation of the new education policy 2020 in the higher education. They actually talked about the effectiveness, how much of this new education policy was actually implemented in higher education institute. What is the outcome or results we can actually expect out of this. So as per the report, they told that there are about 143 universities that are actually functioning in the country. So out of this, 70% actually goes to states, and even in the states 94% of the students actually rely on the state government or state private institution, and whereas only 6% of the students are actually enrolled into any kind of central higher education system, which means that 94% of the students, even in India, even if you study, 94% of the students rely on state government or state private institutions for their higher studies and not the centrally institutions. Now this is one important thing where you need to understand that the states are providing, like the states, it emphasizes the importance of the states in providing a higher education, which means that more than the central government, the state governments are actually providing the higher education. But in this article, they also mentions about a lot of issues that are actually facing. Even if it's central government or the state government, they have actually brought out that there is the gross enrollment ratio in the higher education is pretty much less. There is lack of teacher to pupil ratio is very small. Another thing is that there is no particular infrastructure happening. So a lot of issues has been actually portrayed by this present committee. The first thing that the issue that the committee talks about is there is rigid separation of particular disciplines, like disciplines like engineering, fashion. There is actually rigid separation, and you cannot actually, like we talked the multiple entry, multiple exit scheme and all. This kind of situation doesn't work in this kind like present higher education scenarios. Then we have limited access to education, particularly for socially, economically and disadvantageous areas and groups. This higher education is actually not accessible as such. Then lack of higher education institute. We have about 1000 of the institutions, but that is actually not enough for such a high, like a populous country like India. Then lack of number of faculty is pretty much less. As I have told, the teacher to pupil ratio is also less. Then we have the lack of institutional autonomy. Majority sometimes comes under the state government or like private. So the lack of autonomy within the state government or private is also very much less. Then lesser emphasis on research. If you are looking at the higher education curriculum, we have been following the certain curriculum like for decades and decades without any change. Only in 2020 we are actually upgrading some of the curriculum that was actually existing. So there is actually lesser emphasis on research as well as a change in curriculum as well. Then ineffective regulatory system and low standards of undergraduate education. The thing is that certain like the present education system will not generate you any job opportunities. That is why there is a lot of unemployment in India. Like a lot of students, even if they have passed out, they are not actually employable because they don't have the certain skill set. They might be weak in communication, they might not know the IT course and such, because obviously their employability is also pretty much less. The panel actually states wants to actually increase the gross enrollment ratio. It was about 26.3% in 2018. Thus the panel actually talks about increasing this enrollment ratio, gross enrollment ratio by 50% by about 2035. That is one of the suggestions that the parliamentary committee headed by Vivek Thakur actually talks about. So there are actually what were the recommendations that the committee also made. That was one recommendation where they actually want to increase the gross enrollment ratio to about 50% by about 2035. Another such recommendation, especially for the socially and educational deprived groups. The thing is that financial assistance should be made to such groups so that they can get scholarship to both public as well as private sector. More funds should be allocated so that these section of people can actually access higher education. Then gender balance in admission, like for males and females, both the gender should be actually balanced in the case of admission to higher education institute. Then making the admission process and curriculum much more intrusive, and like it means that to make it much more simple. Then we have to be taught in regional languages, the higher education, like mainly the higher education either mainly in English, but certain states we have seen that it's actually shifting to Hindi as well. The thing is that the higher education should be actually taught in like regional language and bilingually, so that the children or the students can actually understand the subject much more clearly and they can actually produce much output from it. Then, to increase the employability potential, as I have told you, the curriculum of the studies present in India is not actually currently that category of children. Even if they have education, they don't show any kind of quality that portrays to be employable. So, certain employability potential should be actually given out, especially in the case of higher education. Then we have strict enforcement of no discrimination and anti-harassment rules. Now this is actually very important now because of all the recent cases that has been happening in Uttar Pradesh and such. Then specific infrastructure for helping the physically challenged students as well. So there are some of the main important recommendations that the panel has actually put forward. Apart from this, the panel has also appreciated Jammu and Kashmir. Now they state that Jammu and Kashmir is actually the first state of the country to actually implement the national education policy in the higher education. So in such that in their effectiveness in implementing NEP, the panel also appreciate the efforts that has been made by Jammu and Kashmir. Moving on, there are also some of the concerns or some of the topics that the panel has taken up about funding and also the ME, multiple entry and multiple exit. About the funding, it states that the panel actually talks about improving the effectiveness and impact of the funding for the higher education, especially by the higher education financing agency. Like we have to diversify the fund, we have to give more scholarship to ensure that the socially and educationally backward students or children could also get much more education as they need. The fundings need to go beyond the government. We need to pull in a lot of private people, we need to pull in a lot of philanthropic foundations, and also we need to ensure that a lot of international finances also comes into this play. Now what does the panel talks about multiple entry and exit, multiple exit program? As I have told you in my last class about multiple entry and multiple exit, the thing is that the panel also states that for the institute point of view, it will be very difficult for the implementation. The thing is that they won't know the number of students that will be coming in and that will be going out. So now that might actually affect the teacher to pupil ratio. So that is one of the major concerns that has been highlighted by the article and that by the panel, Parliamentary Panel on Education headed by Vivek Thakur. Now moving on, why the Northeast cannot be treated as a single homogeneous group. Now there is a research paper edited by Silhotu and it is named as Identity and Marginality in the Northeast India. The problem is stated that the Northeast actually cumulative a lot of ethnicity. There are a lot of linguistic groups, there is a cultural group, the ethnicity actually varies between different tribal groups within the Northeast region. The author states the problem is that the government considers the complete Northeast as a homogeneous group. All the same laws is applicable for all this different tribal groups. So the author actually stress or highlights the key that the Northeast is not a homogeneous group, it is a heterogeneous group. The culture, the identity, the language, everything varies within each tribal group. We know the Kukis, Nagas, Meithis and such, the lot of ethnic clashes and conflicts that has been actually taking place within the Northeast region. And the author states that like a lot of people from different backgrounds or different ethnicity has actually migrated and established their places in Northeast India, and particularly certain groups like the Indo-Chinese, Mongoloid racial groups has been leading in the Northeast as such for decades altogether. So the author highlights that the Northeast cannot be claimed as totally homogeneous. We need to look into heterogeneity within different tribal groups. And also an important committee called the Base Bahadur Committee. It has been created by the government in 2014 so that they can actually understand or look the various concerns regarding citizens that has been particularly living in the Northeast region. Like they take up the concerns that even if they migrate to some other places, they are actually discriminated because they are coming from Northeast or they don't look like Indians and such. So such discrimination, such concerns of the people, of the marginalized people was actually took place or was actually looked into by this particular committee. So it becomes very important what this particular committee was actually dealing about. Then the author highlights some of the important key, especially in women in conflict regions. The person talks that the woman has actually shouldered a lot of responsibility. The woman is actually forced to take up the role or head of the household because the men are not there. Either the men are dead or the men are gone fighting or they are in jail. So because of all these three reasons, the women are forced to take up the responsibility, the total responsibility of the household. In this wave, they actually face a lot of violence. We can see in the Manipur issue. Even recently we know the 2 women were actually killed. And another video where 2 women was paraded nakedly. So in all these issues, women are actually in the midst of all the violence of the ethnic issue, of the land, the identity. Women face a lot of issues regarding this, and because of this, even if they are migrating to another place, they are actually shouldered with the responsibility of taking care of the household as such. And in this process, they are actually affected by malnutrition, post-traumatic stress and other injuries. Another important thing is that if you are looking particularly Nagaland, it comes under Nagaland is protected under Article 371A. So recently 2 of the MLAs has been 2 women MLAs actually emerged from Nagaland. So we might feel that Nagaland's like women friendly, they are actually appointing a lot of women MLAs into the place. But the ground reality is that we have passed a reservation bill for women recently, but the Nagaland government states that women cannot be actually given a role in decision making. That is actually against our customary law, so because of which this central government law cannot be imposed in Nagaland, and we have the protection based upon Article 371, because of which we can make the laws, and all the central laws are not applicable upon the state laws. The central law of reservation for women is actually against their cultural norms, that women cannot come in the decision making role, only men can come in the decision making role. So that is one of the biased judgment that we can actually face in women actually place in conflicted zones like Nagaland, Assam, Manipur and such. So this is what the entire article of Northeast, like is it homogeneous or heterogeneous, has been dealing about. And in this aspect, certain key terms like the committee, based Bang committee, or the responsibilities that women shoulder, these things you can actually mention as examples, or you can actually add into your answers. This will enrich your main answer body. Now, moving on, we have urban shift. So now we are coming into much more smaller topic. The urban shift is basically dealing with a shift in the urbanization platform. The thing is that urban cities like Bangalore, Delhi, like we know Chennai and such, particularly if we are talking about Indian cities, they have been actually affected with flash floods, heat waves and such. There is flooding activities, there is lot of pollutions that is happening within the cities as well. So in this regard, a lot of data, the urban challenges has been actually released by the UNEP. It states that by 2050, nearly 2/3 of the population in all over the world will be actually living in cities. And for this urbanization process, we have already destroyed about 4 million hectares of about tree covers. So that means how much we have actually destroyed, so that we can actually develop this urbanization. Another thing is that 9 out of the 10 cities dwellers are exposed to polluted air. We know the main cities in India like Delhi, Bangalore, Mumbai and such, where the pollution levels are much more higher. Now we know Delhi is in the top 3 of the most polluted cities in the world. So we can actually say that 9 of the 10 cities dwellers are actually exposed to polluted air. Then about 1.4 billion city dwellers are at high or extreme risk of climate hazards. Now if in the coastal region or all the central India, we are actually affected with like water scarcity, droughts, floods, heat waves and such. So 1.4 billion cities dwellers are at high risk or extreme risk of climate hazards. Then we have 25% of the world urban population lives in informal settlements. The majority of them are women. So these are some of the urban challenges that has been making, because our population is increasing, the urbanization is increasing. So for accommodating the urbanization, we have to destroy the tree cover, and majority of people are actually exposed to pollutants. So these are some of the urban challenges that we actually face day to day. To so face these urban challenges and make much more livelihood much more sustainable, the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, along with the funding of the Global Environment Facility, actually come up with the program of urban shift. In this program, they are actually aiming to transport or support more than 20 cities, particularly in countries like Asia, Africa and Latin America. So they can actually adopt integrated approaches in their urban development and planning, and it will be more sustainable. Now particularly if in India, like particularly now they have taken up projects in about 9 countries, about 23 cities in 9 countries, and one of it is in India. They have actually even undertook coastal management programs in Surat in India as well. So such development programs has been done by UNEP. So the important things which you actually need to know is what is urban shift, which is the funding agency, and who is actually leading the program, and why this program is done. So these are the 3 important factors which you actually need to know, and all these data is something which you can actually use to enrich your main answers as well. Moving on, we have the Global Digital IDs report. Now this Global Digital IDs report has been actually released by the Moody's credit rating system. Now in India, if you are particularly talking about the Aadhaar system, now there is the world's largest digital ID system all over the world. That is India's Aadhaar system. So the Moody's credit rating, they actually have looked upon the report on digital identification system that is actually present all across the world. So in that process, they have actually identified certain risk factors or negative factors which are associated with our Aadhaar system. It actually brings forward the limitation and risk because our Aadhaar is actually centralized and a single entity controls all the data that is actually coming from Aadhaar. So that is portrayed as one of the major risks or one of the major limitations that has been actually associated with Aadhaar as such. Now in India, about 1.2 billion people have actually enrolled for the Aadhaar program. We know the Aadhaar actually takes about our biometrics, it takes about the fingerprints and the iris scan and such. The Aadhaar also gives us about the demographic data, about the people's details and such. But the problem is that everything is centralized. All this data is actually stored within a single entity. Now that is actually susceptible to a lot of limitation. There is concern of privacy, there is concern of security and also reliability, because all the data is centralized and easy to hack the data and release all the data as such. So another important concern is what if the biometrics fail. An important thing is majority of the schemes in India is actually depend upon this Aadhaar, the Jam Trinity and such. So for the manual laborers to actually get access to certain schemes or even food, they need actually the biometric verification or the Aadhaar. But the problem is what if the biometrics actually fail. You know farmers, you know manual workers, they have been actually using their hands for manual works. So what if their biometrics actually change or biometrics is not actually, they cannot actually register this biometrics correctly. So because of which there is actually denial of service to these particular category of people. That is one of the major limitations that has been raised by Moody's and also by our CAG, Control and Account General, CAG in India as well. Now we have also duplication of Aadhaar and data. The one important aspect why the Aadhaar was actually brought in was to actually reduce the middleman, so that all the direct like money related works will actually be directly transferred to the person. It will reduce the number of middlemen, it will actually reduce the number of duplications and such. But we can see that this Aadhaar is also being duplicated, there is also data leakages happening. So we need to validate the use of data as well. So in all this, the Moody's actually give out some suggestions that this Aadhaar is presently centralized. What we need is a decentralized model. So you can actually use blockchain technology by which they can actually create a decentralized technology. So there is more privacy, there is more concern, there is more transparency, and this entire data will not be actually controlled by a single entity. People have control over their own data as well. So that is some of the global digital IDs report. Remember, this has been released by Moody's. This might be, you might get questions like this might be released by the World Economic Forum or some other body, but thing is, the Global Digital IDs report is actually released by Moody's credit rating, and you might actually feel like it's some other body and you might make the question actually wrong also. So it's important you actually know this small details in detail. Now moving on, we have Indians eat more salt than who recommended. In the last few class we have been discussing about the world high blood pressure and such, the global report that has been actually released by WHO. In that it actually states that WHO recommends a daily dosage of only about 5 grams, but in India we actually consume about an average of 8 grams per day, and in that males actually take a lot. Like you can see, the male actually takes about 8.9 grams, while the female actually takes about 7.1 gram, where the male actually consumes a lot of salt. This is actually against the 5 gram daily dosage of WHO as well. So as per the ICMR reports, the salt intake was significantly higher among men, because mainly in the rural areas and such, and the intake of this is mainly higher in the case, salt intake is higher in the case of high employed people and also in the case of tobacco and people who have high blood pressure. These three category of people, who are employed, who consumes tobacco, who has high BP, they take up majority of the salt intake in India. And if we are actually reducing the salt content itself, our blood pressure will actually reduce by about 25%. That is one of the key findings or recommendation that the ICMR has to make. The WHO also stated that we have to actually reduce 30% reduction in the salt intake should be actually achieved by about 2025, so that we can actually reduce the blood pressure. The thing is that this blood pressure actually creates a lot of cardiovascular problems. It can actually lead to heart attack and such. So, it is very important that the salt intake should be ideal. It should not be low and it should not be high. The salt intake should be actually minimal. So, we can actually control our blood pressure as such. It is found that less than half of the participants actually take any kind of measures to actually control their salt intake. Mainly we get the salt from our dietary habits itself, the traditional cooking meals in India, like whatever we eat a lot of salt. So, it is very important that we actually control the salt intake so that we can actually control the BP. Now, moving on to our last topic, we have the balsams moonar. Now, these balsams are particularly touch-me-not plants because they burst seeds and mature seeds, and they actually help in much more seed distribution. These are actually grown in particular season, especially they are grown in humid habits, and they actually complete the entire life cycle within the rainy seasons as well. In India particularly, we can actually find about 220 types of this balsams. Particularly, we can find about 135 certain species of this balsam or the touch-me-not plants is in the Western Ghats itself. So, this plant species actually becomes very important. Now, this plant species acts like an indicator. It talks about the climate change and such. If the climate change, if the proper climate, all the plants will be thriving. But if there is change in the season or change in the climate change, there will be actually reduction in the plant growth. It will reflect the plant population as such in the particular region. If there is any climate change, the plant, like it will reflect on the plant growth as such. So, we can actually know if there is climate change happening in a particular area. The plant actually mainly grows inside the pocket of forest, but because of deforestation and habitat loss, the certain species of this particular kind of blossoms are actually threatened or even actually extinct. And we can actually find the normal life cycle of balsam from about June to December. So, it is very important. Balsams are actually kind of touch-me-not plants. It is also called touch-me-not plant. You might have seen in your neighborhood area in children, like I used to like to play with this touch-me-not plant. So, it is like so it is very important because they actually reflect the climate change and such that is actually happening in a particular area. So, that is it for today. It has been a lengthy session. We will be seeing again on Friday. So, on Thursday we will actually have polls in our Telegram channel Gallant IAS. Like we can actually get the polls between the lunch break time 1 and 1:30. So, please be free and take the polls right on time. Thank you and have a nice day, and we will be meeting again on Friday. Thank you.